Morning at NTV continues Thursday's edition as we get into the peak of the day. Hopefully the sun is coming out where you are. It started off rainy, but again, it's also raining in terms of debt and how much debt we are incurring as Uganda. I am joined by Ausi Kibowa, who is a programs officer and also economic justice and also ISER, which is the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Good morning to you, Ausi.
Yes, good morning to you, Priscilla.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Good morning to all our viewers. I'm really excited about this discussion.
Okay. First of all, tell us about ISER and what you really stand for, especially post-COVID-19.
So ISER is the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. And our focus is more about reclaiming economic rights, but also social rights. And we do this by advocating for the role of public services that includes health, education, water and sanitation, social protection, and we've been expanding over the years. At first we had programs around education and health, but now our work has expanded to include work around social protection. Yeah, and we also do a lot of work in the communities through our community program. We also do a lot of other work on litigation. So we filed several cases in the health sector, education sector, around other programs, other cases have been around SAGE, that is social protection. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Now, as we get into this conversation with us, I just want us to understand the impact of Uganda's debt onto service delivery, as he has rightly said. In Uganda, the secret known is that as of October 2021, according to data from the central bank, Uganda's public debt has risen to 73.8 trillion Ugandan shillings, and that is from 69 Ugandan trillion shillings from June 2021. And critics are asking the question, can middle-income countries like Uganda have such highly scarred debts that we are experiencing in Uganda? So tell us about the debt burden in Uganda from your perspective in terms of service delivery.
Yeah, so we are in a lot of trouble, I must say. ISER has produced a report on Uganda's debt and public services, taking a human rights lens to it. I'll give you a picture of the situation. So first we had COVID, and then we had a surge in prices after the pandemic, and we're still experiencing this. Prices of fuel are up, and then prices of several other basic items are up. And then we're also experiencing an increase in the exchange rate. I know my friends in business do understand what is happening, and now we then have that debt problem. So as ISER, we found it really important to really dive deep into this issue and investigate what is really happening. Yeah, what is the magnitude of the problem, and what are some of the solutions that we could take forward to move out of this problem. I'll give you a simple example. For this budget, Uganda will spend 41 billion daily in loan repayment. 41
billion daily?
Yes, let me repeat.
For the entire financial year?
Over the next 12 months, Uganda is going to spend 41 billion daily in loan repayment. So your government will be paying that amount on a daily basis. In just 5 days, they will have spent the equivalent of what will go to the social protection budget for the entire year. In just 5 days, they'll have spent the equivalent of what is going to social protection within the entire year. So that's how big the problem is. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that could Uganda have borrowed more than it can chew?
Yeah.
Because you're right, we did borrow for COVID. We have been continuously borrowing for infrastructure. We are continuously borrowing for health. We are continuously borrowing for the hydropower that is coming back to bite us in one way or another. We're continuously borrowing for the businesses to start thriving again post-COVID-19 and reboot the economy. So yeah, the reality of the matter is that the government is borrowing left, right and center to keep the country afloat. But could they be biting more than they can chew?
Yeah, the government is actually borrowing more than it can really handle. I'll give you another statistic. Over the next 12 months, our government is going to be borrowing 55 billion on a daily basis. 55 billion.
And that 55 billion, how is it going to be coming back to actually aid social and economic development in the country?
Yeah. So I'll give you first a picture of the loan appetite, yeah, that the government has, and then I'll give you the relation of how that is impacting the delivery of public services, social services, yeah, and how that is impacting the ordinary citizen who's watching us right now, yeah. So this problem compounded during the pandemic. Government wasn't frugally managing its finances, and when the pandemic hit, government could only resort to borrowing. That is the only option we had. So within just 1 year, we saw our debt grow by over 35% within just 1 year. And to break this down simply, one would have assumed that the government, if the government opted to borrow, they would go looking for loans that are cheap. That isn't the case. Government is actually increasingly taking on expensive loans.
For an ordinary Ugandan, when you say expensive loans, what do you actually mean?
These are loans that come with a very high interest rate. Imagine if you are a borrower as a citizen, as an individual, and you had two options to borrow from someone who is charging you an interest rate of 2% versus someone who is charging an interest of 15%. Which one would you opt for?
Of course,
the cheaper one.
Yeah.
So government is increasingly taking on expensive debt. They are looking into internally within the country, the banks are lending the government, and the banks are charging a very high interest rate. Also externally, that is the case. So initially, back in the years, our government used to take loans from international institutions like the IMF and World Bank and several other countries that really gave us loans at very cheap rates. That is no longer the case. Our government is actually now opting for expensive debt even externally. So they are going to commercial banks like Standard Chartered Bank to borrow loans at a very high rate and at a very short repayment period.
You're an economist. So when someone decides to go for an expensive loan, or debt for that matter, I'm pretty sure they have considered the pros and the cons, and I'm sure there are cons that allow them to actually engage with what you've called expensive loans that they are taking on as government. One of them is being security for both parties in terms of when it happens, when government will be able to pay. If they're not able to pay, will this percentage and all these other nitty-gritties within those agreements actually cover up for that time period within which the loan has been given? Wouldn't be that the case?
Yeah, of course, there are some consideration that the government takes while taking these loans. So your question is, why would they then opt for the expensive loans that have a very short time to get repaid? One is because they're the easier ones to get. Government here locally will just say, hey, I need money, and the banks will be already on that table rushing to give it money. That isn't the case when you go for cheaper loans. With cheaper loans, there is a lot of negotiation. Yeah. So I think government is trying to avoid that negotiation that comes with those cheaper loans, the conditions that come with it. Yeah, that could be the reason. But let's take a step back. So our research paper has highlighted the different problems of why we are now in this debt crisis that we are in right now, and what are some of the solutions. So we're going to provide some solutions. I'll provide about 7 of the problems, and then I could share the solutions. Yeah. So one of the reasons why our government keeps taking on more loans, even when the situation, even when it doesn't look like they will be able to pay back, is because of the way they are assessing the extent to which we are in a crisis, debt crisis. Yeah. So the minister came out and said our current debt situation is just moderately risky.
And what are the risks that come with it?
Moderately risky means that the risk it might turn into the worst situation is relatively low. Okay. So that is an underestimation of the problem.
Entebbe International Airport, because of the works that are going on there, of course, you know, the government is taking a loan from the Chinese. So worst case scenario is that they take over the airport?
Yeah. There is a case that they could take over the airport. The story of the international airport is kind of a different one. This is what happened with the international airport. We borrowed money from Chinese, yeah, and as a condition, the Chinese said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put an account. It's called an escrow account, yeah. So the revenues that will come from the airport will go into this account to help you pay back your loan. But that money could otherwise be going into the government's pocket to be spent on health and education. Now, with the conditions that came with the Chinese of having that money put into an account, that in itself is a problem. And that is why you recently saw the finance minister appear in front of parliament and he said, we do not have money. Part of the money exists. It's with the Chinese.
Held within that account.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, just to continue with the way the government is assessing that debt problem, the issue I was trying to make was that there is an under declaration of the magnitude of the problem. The reason why the government is under declaring the magnitude of that debt problem is so that they can continue to borrow more. Yeah. So while the government is doing its current assessment of debt, it is keeping several components. A lot of debt is being excluded while doing the assessment of the problem. For example, during the pandemic, the central bank printed new money and lent it to the government, over 2.5 trillion. That money is not accounted for as part of our debt. Yeah, we've provided promissory notes to hospitals like the Kibowa hospital. All that money is not part of that debt. Just the money that is going to the Kibowa hospital, which is actually a debt in this current budget, is 10% of the healthcare budget. 10%. So of the entire health budget, 10% is already taken away, just going to the investment. Yeah. So all that is not being included as part of the problem. And that is why they are understating the problem. And by understating the problem, it gives them more room to keep borrowing. Yeah. The other situation we're in is the current economic outlook globally. Yeah. So a lot is happening. We have the war going on. That is also having an impact on our debt. Right now, as 20% of our external debt has a variable interest rate. By a variable interest rate, I mean the rate at which you borrowed, the interest you'll be paying, the rate can keep shifting. So for us, what we know normally is you want money from me, you come and I'll tell you I'm charging you 5% interest, and that is what you pay until the loan is done. Now, there is something different. variable interest rates means that if the economic conditions are changing within the economy, there is a chance that rates could go up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
now
right.
that is what is happening. Globally, the rates are going up.
So while we have all these problems, government is planning to actually borrow some. The question is, can we afford it as Uganda?
We can't afford it. We can't afford.
So what are the solutions that initiatives like ISER are actually offering in such a time and period as this?
Okay. I'll just give one last problem and then I'll give you the solution.
No, first give me the solutions, the ones that you've stated.
Okay. Part of the solutions is that the first easiest one that should come to mind is debt relief. Debt relief. If you had taken money from me and you got into a crisis and you realized you wouldn't be able to pay your loan as we had agreed, you'd come and talk to me, be like, hey, Ausi, I had promised to pay this loan in 1 year, but it looks like things aren't good. Please allow me some more time, maybe 3 years, and I'll be able to pay that loan. That is what government should be considering. So that is the first immediate option. Government should approach our lenders and seek debt relief. Yeah. And the lenders are actually willing to provide that debt relief ever since the pandemic came in. Lenders, the G20 are the biggest 20 countries in the world. We do have loans with them. They came out and said, hey, low-income countries, we know you're in a crisis. We are willing to extend the payment of your loans. Yeah? Can you come and talk to us?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's a very interesting solution that you're offering. Of course, we're talking with Ausi Kibowa, who's the Program Officer, Economic Justice, and that is with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. One of the solutions that he's offering is debt relief, and something that government should be able to consider if we're going to be able to sustain the debt that Uganda is harboring, to be able to sort out certain things that are prime and important right now, education and health being priority on the list, as he rightly stated. Kickstarter takes a breather. We return shortly.